The doors were locked from the outside. Not because anyone wanted to trap the workers inside. Company policy simply required it, a routine measure meant to stop theft and unauthorized breaks. On the afternoon of March 25, 1911, that single locked door decided who would live and who would not. This is why 146 workers died in shirtwaist factory fires and changed America's safety rules forever. And understanding what happened inside that building on that ordinary Saturday reveals how a single afternoon reshaped the way an entire nation thought about human life inside a workplace. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory occupied the top 3 floors of the Ash Building in Greenwich Village, a 10-story structure that seemed modern and even fireproof by the standards of the day. Nearly 500 workers filled those floors, most of them young immigrant women from Italy and Eastern Europe, some as young as 14. They bent over sewing machines for 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, stitching the fashionable blouses known as shirtwaists that were sold in shops across the city. The room was cramped. Scraps of fabric littered the floor beneath the machines, dry as kindling and stacked in bins that had not been emptied in weeks. Nobody thought much of it. It was simply how the factory operated, and it had operated that way for years without incident. Then, at around 4:40 in the afternoon, as workers were gathering their coats and preparing to leave for the weekend, someone on the 8th floor noticed smoke rising from a scrap bin. Within seconds, the flames caught the hanging patterns of tissue paper above the cutting tables, and the fire began climbing faster than anyone could process. A phone call raced upward to warn the 10th floor. No such warning reached the 9th. The workers on that floor, the largest group in the building, would not know the building was burning until smoke was already pouring through the stairwells and flames were licking at the windows behind them. What happened next unfolded in a matter of minutes, but those minutes would echo for a century. Workers rushed for the exits and found one stairwell door locked, just as it always was during working hours, a barrier meant to prevent theft that now trapped human beings inside a burning room. The single working fire escape, flimsy and poorly built, buckled under the weight of those trying to flee and eventually collapsed entirely, sending people plunging to the pavement below. The elevators made a handful of desperate trips up and down, saving dozens of lives each run, until the heat warped the shafts and the operators could no longer safely continue. For many of the women left behind, the choice narrowed to 2 unbearable options: burn inside the building or jump from the 9th floor windows to the street below. Crowds had already gathered by then, drawn by the smoke visible from blocks away, and what they witnessed became one of the defining horrors of the era. Firefighters arrived quickly, their ladders and hoses ready, only to discover their equipment could not reach beyond the 6th floor. The safety nets they stretched below tore instantly under the force of bodies falling from 90 feet up. Reporters who rushed to the scene described a rhythm of falling figures, one after another, as onlookers stood frozen, unable to look away and unable to help. By the time the fire was extinguished less than 20 minutes after it began, 146 people were dead, the vast majority of them women, some so young they had barely finished childhood. The city that woke up the next morning was a different city. Newspapers ran photograph after photograph of the bodies laid out on the sidewalk, of grieving families searching rows of coffins for a daughter or a sister, of the burned-out shell of a building that had promised to be fireproof. An estimated 350,000 people lined the streets for a memorial procession, a number almost impossible to comprehend for a single workplace tragedy. Grief quickly hardened into something else: anger. How, people demanded to know, had a modern city allowed conditions like this to exist? How had inspectors missed locked doors, blocked stairwells, and a single flimsy fire escape serving hundreds of workers? The factory's owners, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, were put on trial for manslaughter, accused directly of ordering that stairwell door locked. Their defense attorney worked to discredit surviving witnesses, and after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted both men. The verdict landed like a second betrayal. The people responsible for locking desperate workers inside a burning building walked free, and for a moment it seemed as though nothing would change, that 146 deaths would simply be absorbed into the city's memory and forgotten, the way so many workplace deaths before it had been. But something had shifted that could not be undone. A young activist named Frances Perkins had witnessed the fire from the street that afternoon, watching workers jump to their deaths in real time, and she carried that image into a career that would eventually make her the first female cabinet secretary in United States history. Alongside labor organizers, journalists, and lawmakers, she pushed for the creation of the New York Factory Investigating Commission, a body that spent years examining conditions in factories across the state. Investigators walked through hundreds of workplaces, documenting locked exits, blocked stairwells, inadequate fire escapes, and hazardous machinery, building a case not against two men, but against an entire system that had allowed profit to outweigh safety for decades. The result was a wave of legislation that transformed labor law in New York and eventually rippled outward across the country. Mandatory fire drills, unlocked exits during working hours, sprinkler systems in high-occupancy buildings, limits on child labor, and stronger workplace inspection powers. Many of these reforms became templates for national standards that emerged in the decades that followed, embedding themselves so deeply into ordinary life that most workers today never think twice about a fire exit sign glowing above a door, or a sprinkler head fixed into a ceiling tile. Those protections exist because 146 people did not have them, because a door was locked, because a fire escape was too weak to hold the weight of desperation. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire is remembered not simply as a tragedy but as a turning point, the moment when the invisible cost of unregulated industry became impossible to ignore. It forces an uncomfortable question that stretches far beyond 1911. How many of the safety measures we walk past every single day without a second glance exist only because someone, somewhere, paid for their absence with their life?